Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wa sayyidil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ahli bayti tahirati ajma'in amma ba'd. Fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. We spoke last week about the first of the Khulafa'i Rashideen, Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and we mentioned some of his virtues and his fadail. And we saw a picture emerging of a person who was completely devoted, completely dedicated to the service of Islam and the service of the Prophet of Islam sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and to the service of Allah ta'ala. Whatever pleased Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and whatever furthered Islam and the mission of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the body, the family, the wealth, and the efforts of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu were placed at their full disposal. This is what we saw, that he never held back anything. He was always the first in everything, and he always gave everything that it was possible to give. And we know many of the fadail of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu from the tongue of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. This is something which is notable. It takes a great person to know a great person. The one who recognized the virtues of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu was Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Many of his fadail are narrated on the tongue of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu would always strive and compete against Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But he would always say that you have tired us, you have exhausted us. That the efforts of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu were such that people would become exhausted competing with him, including Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, but they would never be able to match him. They would always fall far, far short of his efforts. This is despite the fact that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was himself a great companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whose achievements and efforts for Islam were magnificent in their own right. Inshallah, we will talk a little bit about him, his life, his efforts, and his contribution today. I'm merely touching on the seerah of these great nobles of Islam. Otherwise, each event, each contribution, each story is worthy of narration in its own right. But this is just to give you a portrait, a general sketch, a high-level overview of some of their notable characteristics and contributions. Imam al-Dhahabi rahmatullah alayh narrates that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu accepted Islam in the 6th year of prophecy, at the age of 27. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu accepted Islam as a young man, and he was amongst the early Muslims, but some time had elapsed before his acceptance of Islam, if we compare him, for example, to Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So there was a time lapse, but in terms of the number of people who had embraced Islam, it was still a very small number at that time, and they were very private, very hidden, very secret. So people had not yet embraced Islam in numbers at that time. And one of the characteristics of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was that he was outspoken, that he was an orator. And in the time of Jahiliyyah, we saw that Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he was chosen as a wise man, if you like, a criminal chief justice amongst the people, and he was also an expert in genealogy. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala was also a position of standing, a man of standing in Jahiliyyah, and he was often the ambassador of the Quraysh. So if they needed to send someone who could speak for them, then he is the one who would be selected. So that he was a man of position, rank, standing, recognized as a keen orator, somebody who could speak eloquently and convey the appropriate message, and also who could make determinations. So already his sense of judgment and his sense of eloquence, these two characteristics were already recognized in the time of Jahiliyyah. Sayyidina Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma narrates that the Prophet ﷺ made a special prayer for Islam to be strengthened either through the acceptance of, through the iman of Abu Jahl or Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And so this is why people say that the companions were the murid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, while Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was the murad. He was Murad-e-Rasul. One of his titles is that he's Murad-e-Rasul. He's the one who was chosen, who was desired by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Normally, it is the position of the disciple or the student that he desires to be a student of the master, a disciple of the master, or a student of the teacher. But here we have a situation where the teacher, the master, is desiring that the student and the pupil should become one of his followers, recognizing that the characteristics he had, the strength, the nobility, and the upstanding adherence to the truth that he had, his sense of judgment, his sense of eloquence, that he would be the backbone of this new religion. So the Prophet ﷺ prayed to Allah to strengthen Islam through the conversion of one of these two, and after that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu accepted Islam. The well-known narration, there are many narrations around the events of the lives of the Prophet ﷺ, but the well-known narration is that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu had gone to the house of his sister and his brother-in-law, and there he heard, his heart was stirred by the words of Surah Taha. He heard the recitation of Surah Taha. And that, one of the characteristics of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was that he was a very honest man. And so when he believed that Islam was not true, and he said this himself, he said, when I believed that Islam was not the truth, then I was staunch in my opposition to Islam. But then he said when he believed that Islam was the truth, then he wanted to be strong in his support of Islam. So whatever he believed in, he would stand by it. And so Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu hears the words of Surah Taha, and his heart is stirred. And he recognizes that this is something otherworldly, something sublime and supernatural, something divine, something beyond the words of man. And so his heart is stirred, and iman is kindled in his heart. And then he decides to go to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he accepts Islam at the hand of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the well-known story about his conversion to Islam. But one of the things which is very noticeable is that after he accepted Islam, he said to the Prophet ﷺ, "Are we not upon the truth?" And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Yes." He said, "Then why should we hide our practicing of this religion?" And so after Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala who accepted Islam, just as the Prophet ﷺ had anticipated in his dua, then the Muslims began to practice openly. And this is also a story, there are a number of stories about why he was given the title of Al-Faruq. Al-Faruq meaning the one who makes a distinction between truth and falsehood, Al-Faruq. Obviously he was a man of justice as well, so he was one who chose between truth and falsehood. But one of the narrations around this name, how the title was given, was that after he has accepted Islam, he said to the Prophet ﷺ, "Are we not on the truth?" And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Yes." Then he said, "Then why do not we practice this faith of ours openly?" And so the Muslims then formed into two groups. One behind Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and one behind Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And then they went out openly to practice their faith, to worship at the Kaaba. So they worshipped openly, knowing that these two, Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that their standing in front of the Quraysh was such that it would be hard to challenge them. And he wanted to practice Islam openly. He wanted that people should confront him and that he would take them on and he would fight them. If they wanted to attack, then he would fight them back. But this was his approach, that he didn't want to be hiding with the truth. He said, "If this is the truth, then we will make it open. Let them come and hit us and we will hit them back." So this was his approach. He had a different take. This was not the time anymore for secrecy. Now he felt Islam had to come out into the open, If it was the truth, then it should be public. The narrations around the hijrah, the migration, are that every group of Muslims or individual Muslims who migrated from Mecca to Medina, they did so secretly, fearfully, that they would be harmed, that their property would be harmed, that their loved ones would be harmed. So many of them migrated secretly at night in the cover of darkness by secret routes, etc., and they went off trying not to be noticed, hoping that they wouldn't attract trouble from the Quraysh. But the migration of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala was different from all of them. It is said that when Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala decided to migrate, then he went to the Kaaba and he made tawaf of the Kaaba. He made 7 circuits of the Kaaba. And then he went to Maqam Ibrahim and he prayed 2 rakat of salah. And then he went to the Quraysh and he said to them, which of you wants to make an orphan of your children and a widow of your wife? And he challenged them, and then he went openly to Medina and nobody challenged him. So he wasn't scared of anyone if he was practicing if he was steadfast on the truth and he was practicing Islam and he was pleasing Allah, he wasn't afraid of anyone. They had to leave behind the house of Allah. They had to leave behind the city of Mecca, this legacy of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he knew that this was a bond that they had with the Kaaba, and all of this they were going to become distant from. He didn't want secrecy, he wanted to make tawaf of that Kaaba. He wanted to do that farewell tawaf that we do when we go on Umrah and we go on Hajj. We make that farewell tawaf. He went and said a final goodbye to the Kaaba openly in front of the Quraysh. And then he went to Maqam Ibrahim and he reads 2 rakat nafil, and then he goes and tells them what his intention is. He says, come, then take me on if you want to make something of it. So his approach was different. And Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala who narrates from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, this is something very specific about the character of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala, which I mentioned before, but in the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, Al-haqqu yantiqu ala lisani Umar. Al-haqqu meaning the truth, yantiqu, it speaks ala lisani Umar, on the tongue of Umar. That when Umar radiallahu ta'ala speaks, he speaks the truth. And this went in 2 directions. First of all, when he knew something was truthful, he wasn't scared to say it. No matter what would happen to him, he would speak the truth. So in this, he had the qualities that were found in the prophets. One of the narrations that we find the Prophet ﷺ said that if there were to be a prophet after me, then it would have been Umar. Meaning he had the qualities of speaking the truth no matter what happened. He would always remain steadfast on the truth. But there was another aspect to this statement, Al-haqqu yantiqu ala lisani Umar, that one of the things that was found was that if Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu would say something, then the verses of the Quran would be revealed in accordance with his statement. So he was so perceptive and so discerning in identifying the truth that when he would say something, then Allah would reveal Quran to confirm what he had said. Meaning that this is so much the truth that we should all act upon this. All the Muslims should act upon what he said. And so in the narrations, the scholars mentioned 21 things in which Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala who made a statement and the Quran was revealed to affirm what he said. Some of these are more and some are less famous, but amongst the more famous of them, one of the things is that he desired that Maqam Ibrahim should become a place of prayer. One of these things that he wanted, he thought, we should pray at Maqam Ibrahim. This was a thought that came into his mind. And when he had this thought in his heart, then Allah Ta'ala revealed the verse, وَاتَّخِذُوا مِن مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلَّى, and take Maqam Ibrahim as a position of prayer. A stone on which the footprints of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam are engraved that was used by him to construct the Kaaba. A prophet who sacrificed his homeland and brought his baby to establish prayer at the Kaaba, who built the Kaaba with his own hands with his son, who left his footprints behind. Allah Ta'ala said, make that place, that indication of where he stood to build the Kaaba, make that a place of prayer. And this was the thought that came into the heart of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, first of all. Another thing that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu recognized was the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He recognized that many different people from all different backgrounds, different characters would come to speak to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they would come to his house and they would invade his privacy and they would demand to see him. And they would come to his private quarters, and the Prophet ﷺ, obviously his quarters were very humble. There was no antechamber, no courtrooms that are found in the courts of the rulers today where you have to be let into one room and then another room and then another room. Very simple, humble apartments. So when they would come to see the Prophet ﷺ and call out to him loudly, then the wives of the Prophet ﷺ would have to come out to see them or talk to them, and their privacy would be invaded. And then he thought to himself that it would be good if they were to cover themselves up, so that the intentions of the people would not become corrupted with regard to the noble wives of the Prophet ﷺ. And so he had this thought, and then Allah Ta'ala revealed the verses of the hijab. This was another thing. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu used to say, I agreed with my Lord in these matters, and he would list these different things. There was a time when the wives of the Prophet ﷺ united against him in their jealousy. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said, be careful, that if you don't treat him with appropriate respect, it may be that Allah Ta'ala causes him to divorce you and to appoint better wives for him. And so the verses of the Quran were revealed in affirmation of the words of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala, reminding them that they had an honor of being the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and if they didn't appreciate the honor of that status, then others would be brought in their place and they would be removed from that office. This is something Allah Ta'ala said to different people, the companions as well, that if you don't appreciate the station that Allah has given you, then you will be removed and others will be put in your place. When he said, Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, when you are the best nation from mankind, there is a duty upon you. Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhawna 'anil munkar, that you have to command what is right and forbid what is wrong. That's a condition, then you are the best nation. If you can't fulfill this responsibility, someone else will be brought in your place. Then about the prisoners at Badr, the captives that were taken at Badr, he had a different view, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala had a different view. In the end, the counsel of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala was taken, but the Quran was revealed affirming the position of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala. Another thought that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala had was regarding the prohibition of alcohol, that he saw the harms that alcohol was causing and he felt that it should be prohibited. And this was another thing that was revealed in affirmation of his thoughts, his judgment regarding the harms of alcohol. And then Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala says that a verse of the Quran was revealed saying that Allah Ta'ala created man from clay. And that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, when he heard that Allah Ta'ala created man from clay, he said, فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. Blessed be Allah, the best of creators. And then Allah Ta'ala revealed this verse, فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. Blessed be Allah, the best of creators. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu says that the Quran was revealed to affirm the words that he spoke after the first verse was revealed. There's another thing which is mentioned from Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, which narrates to the commands around Ramadan. Verse 187 of Surah Al-Baqarah. It says that it is permitted for you to approach your wives in the nights of Ramadan. And the Asbab al-Nuzul, the circumstances of revelation of this verse, it is mentioned that up to this time, it wasn't permitted to be with the wives at night in Ramadan. But there was one time with Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was with his wife in the time before suhoor. So in the depths of the night, but before the suhoor time. And then Allah ta'ala made it a general command for the people, that these are, the wives are a garment for you and you are a garment for them. Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahunna. And then he made it permissible for people to be with their wives at night. So this was a mercy upon the people who were fasting, that they were allowed the companionship of their wives at night. Another contribution of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala to Ramadan is that he first established the practice of praying Taraweeh in Jama'ah, in the mosque, in congregation. Before that, people would pray the Taraweeh individually and different amounts, different rakats. But he was the one who established that this would be done in Ramadan in congregation and in the mosque, and people would gather for Taraweeh. And then when he saw this, when he passed by and the people were praying, he said, "Ni'matu bid'atin hadhihi." He said, what an excellent innovation this is. So he was very pleased with what he had done. When he saw that all the people were gathered in the mosque, in congregation, in Ramadan, listening or reciting the Quran, listening to the recitation of the Quran, he was very pleased with what he had done. And then this became incumbent upon the people because of the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, saying that the sunnah of my sunnah and the sunnah of my Khulafa'i Rashideen, Al-Mahdiyin, is incumbent upon you. And this is why it becomes an obligation upon us as Sunnat al-Mu'akkadah. He was appointed Khalifa by Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. By Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He was appointed the Khalifa by Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu on his deathbed. This was the legacy of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, to make Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu the Khalifa after him. And he was the first to take the title of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the faithful. And one of the things which is very noticeable about him is his simplicity. It is said that many times his clothes would be patched. Many of his clothes would be patched, and the cloth that he had, he would use as sparingly as possible, try to keep as few possessions as possible. And one of the things he did when he appointed someone to governorship is he would take an account of all their assets. At the time they became governor, he would take an account of all their assets to see if they are enriching themselves through their position. And if he found that they were abusing the office, or they were enriching themselves or adopting luxurious practices, then he would have them punished. So he wanted the same simplicity from them that he practiced himself. This is one of the defining characteristics of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. He's a very humble man, despite his magnificent achievements. And he had a great fear of being held accountable in front of Allah Ta'ala. He was always afraid that he will have to account for how he has treated the people under his command. One of the times he gathered all of the people when he was the Khalifa, he gathered all the people in the mosque and he said, I want you to know that in the time of Jahiliyyah, that I would tend the flocks. And he humbled himself before them and said that I was the person who couldn't control animals. I would be chastised for not controlling animals. And the people said, what have you done? You have gathered the people and humiliated yourself in front of them. He said, yes, that's what I wanted to do. Because I didn't want it to go to my head that today this is an empire over which I am ruling. I wanted to remind myself of my own humble origins, and so I gathered everyone and I humbled myself in front of them. So despite the magnificence of his achievements, he was always humble in his heart and always gave that, he was a model of humility in front of the people. We know that much of the expansion, if Islam was established under the Prophet ﷺ and preserved in the Arabian Peninsula and beyond under Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala, we know that the real expansion of the Islamic empire happened under Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala. And the great battles against the superpowers of Byzantine and Persia, the great victories happened under the command of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala. And we know the famous story of his humble entry into Jerusalem, that he was walking on foot whilst his servant was riding upon the beast. So his servant is mounted and he was walking because he would take turns with the servant. He recognizing that you are a man and I am a man. He is the emperor and he is his servant, but he, in front of Allah Ta'ala, even at the moment that he is entering as the conqueror of Jerusalem, yet still, Al-Haqqu yantiqu ala lisani Umar, the justice of Umar radiallahu anhu is so pure, so unadulterated by arrogance, that he is able to recognize that he is a man and I am a man. If I am tired, then he is tired. Let us take turns to ride the beast, so that he has his turn and I have my turn. And he did not even make sure. In fact, perhaps he even did make sure that he was the one who was walking when he entered Jerusalem, to add to his humility. Or perhaps by coincidence it was his turn to walk at that time. But another person would have said, you can ride up to the point we enter, but when we enter I need to be mounted so everyone knows I am the ruler. But whether it was coincidence or whether he made sure, he was walking at the time he entered Jerusalem. And he made sure that the religious rights of the Christians there were preserved, to the point that he would not pray in their place of worship. Because he said, tomorrow everyone will make this a place of worship for the Muslims, and the Christians will be disenfranchised. So he was so careful. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu prayed for martyrdom in the city of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a prayer which it was hard to envisage. After establishing such a vast empire, he asked for the prayer of the death of martyrdom, but in the city of the Prophet. And the people wondered at this prayer. They thought martyrdom would be achieved on the frontiers. Here at the seat of government, how would you achieve martyrdom? But he wanted both the death in the state of martyrdom and death in the city of the Prophet. He wasn't prepared to leave the city of the Prophet either. He asked for both of these together. Allah Ta'ala gave him those things when he was assassinated in the prayer, in the salah, in the city of the Prophet ﷺ. May Allah Ta'ala elevate his rank, and may he have mercy on the Muslims of Syria, the Muslims of Palestine, the Muslims of Lebanon, Sudan, all our Muslim countries. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy on the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Restore their grandeur, restore their dignity. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.